weekly check-in sessions, there is a lot of crying and tears, and it's been really, really hard. And what I've always said is that, how engaged the people team is a predictor of the broader company engagement. So, when you run an engagement score, if the people team scores are low, there's trouble. And so what I tried to do is encourage people leaders to lead by example with using your time off policies, having team offsites just for your team. If other departments have budgets for department offsites, the people team should have one too, and do experiences and activities that will really, excite and motivate the team. When I was leading the people team at Envision, we would try to pick a location that no one on the team had ever been to before. So for example, we got to go to Charleston because no one had ever been to Charleston, South Carolina. I would encourage you to use your professional development dollars, use your wellness perks, all the things, all the hopefully great programs you have at your organization, that you're using them too, and sharing those stories. I also want to give some tactical advice around burnout, because often what I see, especially from people earlier in their career, is that you will voice that you're burned out. Like, you will voice that you don't have enough resources on your team, but you don't always do it in a way that the business will listen to and the business will understand. So some advice for you is, if you are under-resourced or experiencing burnout, that you have good data and documentation to back that up. What I mean by that is that people teams should take time to track all the work that you're doing that goes unseen. So how many employee questions are you getting over email and Slack? How many employee relations issues are you supporting? How many performance improvement plans? How many terminations? All this work adds up and is really good data to reinforce the need for an additional headcount, or to bring in, an outsourced vendor, additional support, consultants, whatever. And also how you present the data is important. So not just, showing a spreadsheet, but working on your exec presentation skills and your exec influence when presenting that business case.
Shelby, I really like the thing that you said, as being part of a people team. It really feels, and really I can relate it to those things. And really, I think that looking at my own personal development in the organization, these are really things that how for us to develop ourselves and to grow within the organization. That's beautiful.
Thank you.
One thing I wanted to add to kind of what Shelby was saying is really looking, I love that you mentioned the people team. I think we often forget about ourselves because we're often holding everyone else up in some way. And one thing that the Bonusly team has been kind of looking into and really thinking a lot about this past year was around the idea of well-being and resiliency, and actually building resiliency and what it takes to build it. And there's lots of studies out there. UPenn has probably done one of the longest running ones around well-being. And then the Surgeon General actually put out a study recently that was really well done. And it's funny, we look at all of the stuff that comes out of it, but it really goes back to kind of basic things. Like, again, how am I finding meaning in what I'm doing? Am I being recognized? Do I get to do things in my job that I really like? But one thing I found that has been helpful is, like, I think we forget or don't see that we're actually doing some of these things, or we're not as intentional about doing some of these things. And when we bring that back, it's a good reminder. Oh yeah, I am really good at that. That brings me joy in my work, and acknowledging even that for just a moment. And that could be something, and it doesn't have to be work-based either. So like, if you do your Wordle every day, it's like this, like, oh, I've mastered something. This is great. It's just that little spark of like accomplishment that can help us build the feeling and those neural connections and those habits of to build up this resiliency, especially as we're going through kind of a lot of stuff that we are right now. So really fascinating stuff. I'll drop the links into the chat too, so people can see, but yeah, we've been really focused on that this year.
Just want to add on, like, from not the people perspective, but in general as a manager, and like how I try to make sure that people are being seen. I would say part of the things that I think is very important is also to try to like celebrate accomplishments and small things, that even if people, you know, are working very hard, like it's almost expected, right? It is important to take a time to like acknowledge. So for example, we have like in our Slack channels, and I know that as part of HiBob, you have the ability to even create, you know, accomplishments or kudos to other team members, and I think it's really important, actually. You know, we have a very active like Slack channel that we talk about, you know, great things or achievements that might not be, you know, oh, we closed a deal or we've done XYZ. It's the little things that I think keep people motivated and seen, especially when you're not at the office, you're remote most of the time, and in my view, those little acknowledgements really matter. We even have our team like Slack emojis and things like that that really show like the personalization aspect. I think it really helps you feel more connected. It goes, you know, it's an overarching thing, I think, from this panel. It's like, how do you make this feel connected? And in my view, also burnout is part of feeling isolated in a sense. So I do think those things matter when you look at your teams, both as people team, but of course on a larger scale.
Okay, let's flip it a little bit to culture. So Yaniv, this would be a question for you as someone whose role is very much culture oriented. What would you say was the priority for employees when it comes to culture? And which sort of core company values did they appreciate the most in 2022?
Well, we actually in HiBob went through a process this year of creating a new set of values for the company. It was HR initiative, but it spanned through all the departments and employees of all levels. I must say that one of our values is bring me, win as we. And this for me really represents the way that we do things, and how the HiBob way of inclusion and accepting people of other cultures and building great teams together across the globe. I think we need to come to any cross-cultural interaction with an understanding that we don't know everything about the other side, about their culture, about who they are, and we need to be respectful about them, of course, even considering like time zones differences and different points of view that we need to be aware of as we go through any discussion.
Completely agree. I think that one of, like, to Yaniv's point, even like the time zone aspect, right? So we are a distributed team. Most companies are now distributed, multi-time zone, multicultural. And I think it's really important to give space to these things, right? Whether those are the small acknowledgements, celebrations, but also being mindful of that in terms of like when to schedule meetings, your availability, all of those things. Try to document as much as possible, try to work as synchronously as possible. In my view, all of those things will help, and acknowledging different types of cultures and creating even like events or providing different I would say different employees to express themselves. I think it's really, really great as well. On educational, I think that one of the things that personally, it's one of the things that I love with our company and how we're building this, that people are very diverse. They come from different areas, backgrounds, all of those things, and you really want to make sure that they're acknowledged and heard. So creating rituals or processes towards that, I think is also very helpful to keep in mind.
Shelby, Vicki, do you want to chime in here?
I was worried about like talking over somebody. I think the only thing I'd add is, I guess it's not surprising. I mean, I've seen it even pre-pandemic, like people just wanting to know more about company values and what it looks like in action. And I've been lucky in the last, I worked at companies where, you know, you bring in a new head of marketing and suddenly you have new values and they print them on these cards and great, everyone go off and do them. But the whole living in action is so important. And I think getting specificity around what it looks like is incredibly valuable. Bonusly just recently did stay interviews with everyone at the company. We're not very big. It's only about 100 people. And what came out of it was so heartwarming for me. It was like, you know, we asked the question, what would potentially pull you into another job or make you consider talking to a recruiter? And they're like, well, if the comp was big enough, but they'd have to have all of these things because the way we live and do work at Bonusly is so different. And I don't think I can find that anywhere else. And it'd have to be a very, very large sum of money to even make me consider leaving what we've got here. And I think we can't underestimate the kind of culture that we want to have inside a company and that people want to be a part of. So fun to see all the stuff going around on like how do we build values and what that and building culture and what that looks like.
Amazing. Okay, so I think now is the time to jump into another poll. So let's launch a poll with the question, what is your top priority area for 2023? Let's give everyone a little bit of time to answer. I'm really curious to see the results before we dive into the second half. Oh, I love seeing this real time so fast. Okay, let's get to, okay. Okay, so we have the results, and as I assumed, it's employee engagement and retention. Okay, but it is followed by navigating the economic downturn. So I'm sure we'll talk about that as well. Okay, so let's dive into the big question. So what awaits people experts in 2023? So Vicki, a question for you here. Even as we go into a period of recession, or at least let's say reduced spending, employees have made it clear that compensation alone is not what keeps them in a company, as you just pointed out a few seconds ago. So how can people teams get creative with employee experience, and what can they provide to make employees feel good about their job?
Yeah, you know, I think it's just what I mentioned before. Part of that is really understanding what employees want, right? What motivates them, and kind of going back to earlier, where it's like it's really hard sometimes to know exactly what they want, and because they're so different. But as managers, we have an opportunity in our one-on-ones, through career conversations, to really understand what motivates them, and then it's really helping them find that connection between what it is that drives them at work. You know, even in their personal life, right? If it's like, I love seeing the impact of numbers. I love chasing a number, right? Or hitting goals, or helping people figure out their problems, whatever it might be. Then it's also calling out, hey, do you realize that when you do this thing here, that is actually more of this? Because oftentimes we're so bogged down in the day-to-day, we stop seeing that. And I think I do it for myself too. If you ask me, you know, what am I most proud of over the last year? What is everything we accomplished? I'd probably sit silent for about 3 to 5 minutes because I really can't think of it right away. But there is so much to be proud of in what we do, as you know, in our work. And so I think helping employees figure that out creates a better experience for them. Building a culture they want to be a part of is a better experience for them. And that's technically free. You don't have to spend money on that because it's stuff we should be doing anyway. It's in the way to get there is probably through training. I think Bonusly as a platform, shameless plug here, it's been interesting for me as an HR person who has not done peer-to-peer recognition to come in and see how this actually builds culture. And if you think about how, I'm sure some of you have heard that statistic before, where you have to give so many pieces of positive feedback before you can maybe deliver a critical one, or to create that psychological safety, right? If you have all of that, I think as managers, we're told, okay, you need to do that. And I'll be honest, I don't always do that. But if you have peer-to-peer recognition, whether that's through Bonusly or something else, that still builds up that culture and that psychological safety to be able to go and give more critical feedback, and to build that culture around, hey, we really value the things that you do. People want to be seen, and recognition is a great way to acknowledge that you see what someone is doing. And so it's really, again, I know I'm kind of talking in circles, but going back to what it is that your employees want, and then how do you create that experience? And if you can't figure it out too, there are so many brilliant minds. I often, at a hackathon for our company, I actually, not an engineer, so I wasn't doing an engineering project, but I had a brainstorm with a whole bunch of employees around how do we do remote work better? And so we just did this whole board and had this whole board full of ideas by the time we were done with our session. So, don't feel like you have to do this alone. There's a lot of people out there who have ideas about kind of interesting things to make the experience better.
I love that. And just total non-personal plug, we were huge Bonusly users at Envision, and being a fully remote company, it was a wonderful way to showcase small work that was happening in pockets around the globe you would have never known about otherwise, people just living our values even though they were unseen. And then also big celebration moments of big releases that the whole company would pile on, and people would get lots of Bonusly dollars for their work. But yeah, I just want to kind of reinforce what Andrea said at the beginning of this, that we are in recession, whatever you want to call it. Inflation is on the rise, and data is showing through many of the surveys that I've seen recently that just because inflation is raising, it doesn't mean companies are increasing salaries or increasing their merit budgets accordingly. And so people teams are going to have to get creative with their programming to keep people engaged if cash isn't going to just be thrown around anymore. So a couple ideas, like Vicki said, I'm working with a lot of my clients on Workplace 3.0, they've had many iterations of their remote work plan. So continuing to invest in flexible work schedules and articulating ways of working so people know what the plan is, know what's expected of them as we head into 2023. I think learning and development opportunities and upskilling will become a big focus for 2023 for employees, but also especially managers. I think for anyone on the call, if you have a very limited budget or no budget, I would love as many dollars as possible to be invested in manager training, whether you're creating content yourself that's available open sourced, or bringing in a manager training partner, because your managers will have superpowers and kind of exponential impact on people's experience and engagement. And then when it comes to cash, my only suggestion is, instead of thinking about salary increases, you could think about spot bonuses or equity grants in lieu of, making your whole salary budget go up.
I would add to that also other benefits that answers things that Shelby and Vicki said now, that like the need for a continued need for flexibility or things in personal life of employees for us to provide to them. I can give 2 examples of things that we did this year to policies that we started working at HiBob with, a working from anywhere policy, allowing our employees to work anywhere in the world for a limited time during the year, up to certain criteria, but allowing them the flexibility of this option, and also a parental policy that we started this year that doesn't cost us in cash, doesn't cost a lot, but actually provided a framework of a definition of how we want to take care of our employees, either if it's the main caregiver or the second caregiver, having a new baby in the family, which I think also affects the employee and his family, not only again by cash, but as the initiative is.
I love it. I echo everything that has been done here. It's just like a reflection on what things that we would love to do as well in Gable. And I think that in general, the common thread here is that cash is not everything. There are many, many other ways to be able to help with employee experience and compensation and acknowledgement. And yes, thank you for all the ideas. It's incredible.
Okay, moving on to building culture. So Yaniv, again, throwing this one at you, what would you point out as the best ways to build your company culture for a world where your employees are distributed, just to continue on what you just pointed out?
Yeah, well, first I would say and recommend for everyone to use the HiBob platform, because it does exactly that. And it's a great way to keep people connected and to create a culture of engagement. And I think that communication at all levels, at the company, department, or team, and even one-on-one with your manager, is very, very important for that. Also, to incorporate the values, as it has been said before, to incorporate the values of the company in the day-to-day. These values should be common and for everyone to be aware of them and to feel connected to them, so people can relate and act according to them. And as these values appear more and more in our day-to-day, they will help creating and maintaining this culture.
Yeah, I love what you said, Yaniv. I just feel so strongly about articulating what the values mean. We've talked a lot about this today, of living the values and constantly sharing examples of what the values mean. When we were all in an office together, we could sense what a company culture was about by observing the physical environment. We could see how people were interacting with one another. We could see the way meetings were conducted in a conference room. But in a remote environment, you can't. You have to, companies have to be far more explicit about the way culture shows up and kind of what's expected of people. And it starts with the leaders, of course, demonstrating the culture and leading by example. A lot of the work that I do with my clients, kind of in these workplace plans or whatever companies call it, is writing down these norms and expectations, which can be very challenging. One, because it's hard to articulate it, put it into words, but sometimes it's just uncomfortable for companies to write it down and then be expected to live by it. So I like to start with kind of executive sessions and getting them talking, seeing like where are we aligned, where are we not aligned? Okay, let's focus on the areas we need to get to clarity on. And then also doing a lot of, like I said, listening at the employee level, culture surveys, value surveys, like just a lot of like focus groups, anything to get a lot of information from all levels of the organization when you're thinking about your values and norms and expectations. But I think just any time spent in this area is worth it. Making, the implicit, or what's just like, you should just know, and you should just know what's expected of you, and making it explicit.
I 100% agree. Just one last thing that I want to double click on is basically the intentionality. Is just exactly to Shelby's point. You're not there, you don't know, you cannot feel it or assume something is like that. And by explicitly say, I think it actually is a very strong message, right? We commit to it. It's available everywhere. It's open. I think that in general, the transparency is really crucial, like to be able to know exactly what is going on, what works, what doesn't, and also have ability to have open feedback, I think is really crucial. And to have the door is always open mentality, I would say. So even creating intentional sessions towards that as well. But the more we are keeping transparency and visibility to things that we're doing and how we're building this, and also saying, you know, we're not perfect. It's an iterative process. We are in this together. I think also helps connect people to the company and leadership.
Well, Liza, while I have you there, I have a question for you that is about connections. So in this distributed world where intentionality is hugely important, what can people experts do to promote connections between employees? And more importantly, how can they measure these connections?
So great question. I touched upon this a little bit at the beginning. I think there is the intentionality of it. So the way that at least we see it by customers using Gable is that they do put guardrails and some instructions on how to do it, like what's the reason to come together, having visibility to that as much as possible, but also maintaining flexibility. So the way that we see it is creating either like regional champions that can be either people from the people team or some managers that live in different areas that, you know, are passionate about it, but empowering them with the tools to do so, right? So because the way that we see it right now, the people team are distributed and I would say their goals are to instill something that empowers end users to do so. So as much as possible in terms of policies that encourage that help a lot. So that's the way that we see it played out in Gable.
Yeah, I think I'd love to add the intentionality piece. And I think going back to what Shelby was saying around, you know, make the implicit explicit of even calling out, hey, we're doing this because I want us to feel connected to one another, right? It helps us set context, even though it feels like a given, like, no, we're doing this to get to know each other. But even calling out that we're doing this to get to know each other because it helps us work better cross-functionally or across departments. And I think if you think about it as different levels of connections too, right? Between people, between manager and employee, between teams, what are you trying to solve for? Because it could look different. And I think if you're thinking about how you want to stay connected, it doesn't have to be this really big, hard thing, like just having a time when your team gets together and answers a funny question, spend 30 minutes doing that can make a big difference. Or even just doing, we realized, you know, our G&A functions are all pretty small, right? My team's a team of 5, finance is a team of 3. Why don't we combine some of these? Because we also work very closely together, and it gives us an opportunity to see each other and start to build those relationships because we're spread all across the United States.
Amazing. Okay, I think we have one last question, and this one is for Shelby. So Shelby, how can people teams navigate a year that I think we can assume by now will be marked by an economic downturn? What challenges will they find along the way? And what can they do to come out the other side stronger?
Yeah, great question. I've shared a few ideas already, but I have a few more to share with you. So, you know, I mentioned that, you know, your budgets may be frozen or decreasing. And so you may not be able to add many new tools or programs this year in 2023. So, but I view this as an opportunity. You know, I've talked a lot about kind of documentation and And I think that, say, for example, you rolled out a performance management platform last year, but you aren't using all of the features within that performance management tool. This is a great opportunity to slow down and invest more deeply into that tool and into that program. So, making sure that you have buy-in across the organization, meaning like you have high adoption of the product. There's good documentation and training around that program and that tool, and that you can really prove the return on investment of your performance management program. That's just one example. In general, I'm a big fan of building people teams like product teams. And I think Liza spoke on this a little earlier as well, that I'm big on iteration. And what I mean by building a team like a product team is that you don't, like I mentioned, like go into a black hole for 6 months and then release something that nobody wants. You kind of ship good enough stuff, listen, get feedback, iterate, ship again. And so this is a great time to experiment and do pilots or try things and frame it to the organization that's what you're doing. In addition to kind of good documentation, I also use the term marketing a lot, like that I always am encouraging teams to market themselves better, like market a program. Like we are so good at doing great work, but we're not really good about talking about the work and like getting buy-in, like making sure all the leaders know what we're up to and know why we're doing it. And so just, again, focusing on documenting what you have, training people, iterating on those programs and making them even better will be a great win. Like you can have so many wins in 2023 if you focus on that. And then the final area that I love and care deeply about is around people data analytics and insights. And so often we're so busy, we don't really take time to analyze and look at the data. We often aren't actually collecting the data that we need to learn from the data. And so 2023 can be a great opportunity to build a people analytics muscle on your team if you don't already have that as part of somebody's job. Where when the during tough times, often what happens is that leaders say to people teams, I want to know about team performance. I want to know about productivity. I want to know who are our good managers, who are our bad managers. How are we doing on pay equity? All these questions that require data to answer. So I would love everyone on the call to think about kind of how can you build that people analytics muscle on your team, and then use that to be a really strong, when you're making recommendations, those are driven by like the data insights that you've gathered.
Shelby, that speaks so much to me, especially the part around building a people team like a product team. Because I often talk about how like there's even in different parts, like our recruiters are like our internal sales team, our HR business partners are our customer success team. And I was just talking to my team yesterday about like, hey, we need to get better about our KPIs and what we're measuring, because we should, we need to. And so we're setting up a session in January to just brainstorm around like, all right, if we have all of this data, it's one of the most challenging things here. How do you measure people without also sending a million surveys throughout the year? And so we're going to brainstorm thinking through how do we connect some of the information that we have with each other. But yeah, I think one thing I'd also add to that is as you're thinking about the investments that you want to make in this, like, don't be afraid to ask for things, because I think people ops teams generally do. We are the first to have to halt any sort of spend because we technically don't bring money in. For the most part, it's really hard for us to. And so, but it's important because there's still a cost to disengagement. There's still a cost to turnover. And I'd ask, like, what is the cost of not doing something? If we don't train our managers, okay, so yeah, it's going to cost $20,000. But if we don't do this, what is that potential loss of in either having to interview all over again or whatnot? And don't be afraid to ask, because the worst thing is they're going to say no, and you're just right back where you started, so it doesn't really matter.
Okay, wow, what a great discussion. Like, thank you everyone so much for all the insights and tips and examples. I truly hope our audience is enjoying it as much as I am. So I think we're ready to dive into the Q&A. So everyone, you can slowly start dropping your questions into the Q&A module. And while you're doing that, I want to give everyone a little background about Gable, Bonusly, Shelby, Wolpa Consulting, and HiBob. So I'll start with Gable. We are the only platform people teams need to power distributed work, help employees connect, and stay on top of insights and data. With Gable, employees can find and book workspaces nearby and connect with their team, while people teams can set budget and usage policies, track spending, and oversee workplace data from a single dashboard. Gable is an easy way for people experts to provide spaces for connection while running a data-driven workplace that helps them make informed decisions and design a workplace strategy that employees will love. Next, we have Bonusly. Bonusly is an employee engagement platform focused on recognition, rewards, and gathering feedback. It's not just a way for managers to recognize their employees, but also and especially for peers to recognize one another and keep work that they're doing visible, something very important right now, as we already spoke about. Next, we move on to Shelby Wolpa Consulting. Shelby has been a people leader at 4 venture-backed companies that have scaled to Unicorn Plus status, where she built and led the people team through hypergrowth. She now advises CEOs, people leaders, and VC firms to bring those learnings to companies as they transition to globally distributed people-first cultures. Shelby specializes in helping companies build a strong people operations foundation, create best-in-class employee experiences, avoid expensive mistakes, and plan for the future. If you want to talk more, she has Ask Me Anything sessions where you can book time or purchase one of the playbooks available on her website. And finally, we have HiBob, the HR platform that powers productivity, engagement, and retention. From out of the box onboarding, workflows, performance management, and compensation management to integrations with leading payroll providers and more, HiBob's breadth of core HR functionality gives your team everything you need to operate efficiently. I will open a poll now for everyone who wants to hear from either of our companies. And while we do that, let's jump into Q&A time. Let's see those questions. And while we're waiting for the questions to pour in, if any one of our speakers would like to add anything, now is the time to take the floor.
I'll just a quick little shout out. I'll put the link in the chat. I have a free guide also on my website for building remote first culture. So if anyone is interested to learn a little bit more about what I talked about today, I'll share that free guide for you.
Amazing. Okay. We have less than a minute to go, and we don't have any questions from the audience today, so I think we can wrap this one up. I think we have something in the chat, actually. Shelby, it's for you. It says, Shelby, you mentioned analytics and data being so important. Traditionally, these roles are not hired until an HR team is really established at a much later stage. Would you recommend to early stage companies to invest in this hire sooner?
Great question, Faye. Thank you. So my suggestion is not to invest in a hire sooner, but make sure that you have the systems in place that can do a lot of the heavy lifting around analytics for you. So for example, I am a huge fan of ChartHop for globally distributed teams. And it's just one example of a tool that can give you a lot of great insights around your hiring data, attrition, DEI metrics, promotion data, pay equity data, a lot of kind of the core metrics that a people team can use to raise insights to the leadership team. So I'm an advocate of using tooling before you invest in a full-time hire, and a headcount could be better served in other areas.
Thank you, Shelby. I think with this response, we can conclude. Thank you, everyone who joined us today. I hope you had a great time with us, and thank you to all 4 of our amazing speakers. So everyone have a great rest of your day, and you can expect the recording in your inboxes tomorrows.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Thank you,
everyone.
everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.